I would now like to invite Mr. Jeetendra Nair, Director and CEO Scholar Point Education Services Private Limited, to talk on the vocational training in higher education, the new Indo-African landscape. Mr. Jeetendra Nair is viewed as an industry leader and has been a speaker at various industry-related forums in India as well as abroad, and has often participated in panel discussions connected with information technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, all the honorable dignitaries, my co-panelists, and the Chamber of Commerce, thank you everyone. My name is Jeetendra Nair, and I've, as a matter of fact, put together a small slide for all my friends here from Africa and all the people who are interested to do business in Africa. I must say, with my experience of Africa and its economy over the last 5 to 6 years, I've had some wonderful experiences. And I must tell you in advance that my complete presentation is based and positioned towards the education and training industry. To be more precise, it's about vocational training and higher education. I'm sure there should be certain takeaways that our friends from Africa can have. The idea is to share certain platform successes that we have had in India and how that can be probably implemented in Africa in a collaborative mechanism. So essentially from agriculture, which takes care of the central part of the body, moving on to the top 6 inches, as we say, education and the knowledge power. So we thought it's I for Africa. This has been probably one of the most successful ringtones, in India. And statistics tell us that it made 7.5 times more money than what the whole of Africa did, which by the way was only 22% of the official money, because in India also piracy is very high. So that's how we start this journey. The presentation has some compartments. It may be a good thing for all of us to set the context right. We'll talk about what we understand the Indian perspective of Africa as an economy in the absence of a lot of data that we get from the market or from the web engines. I think this is something that will come a little handy for our friends from Africa to understand as to what India thinks about Africa and its potential from an education and training perspective. The second aspect is to have a deep dive as far as vocational training is concerned. The third aspect is to touch on the higher education. I have some very interesting propositions to share, which I have on various occasions and forums shared with different ministries of different countries. Subsequent to that, I'm proposing certain, if you ask me, give me a plain canvas and tell us that what would you like to paint. So that's precisely what I've put together in the desired outlook slide. And going forward, you could ask me any questions if you have. So I was going through this, when I was given this opportunity, we were just going through some data points that we had collected over the last 5 years. One of them, which was quite enthralling from our perspective, was this particular study that this gentleman had done. And it says that a 1-year increase in stock of Africa's tertiary education would boost the annual rate of economic growth by about 0.63%. That, if you look at this particular point, it conceals too much more than what it reveals. The essence is that if the focus and the political will of the continent gets directed towards education as a economic and a social activity, the proposition that it can offer in general to the society as well as to the fraternity can be humongous. Likewise, they have given us another study point which speaks about even if you have to just escalate it to the level of Egypt at the moment, which by far and large is not supposed to be at the highest level, but even if that slight tweak has to happen, okay, the proposition and the market boom that one is talking about is huge. So we consider this as a 1.6 trillion market. It recorded and we are talking about the continent, okay? It recorded a 5% average growth. Now, there are certain economies which not strangely, I must say, very, very surprisingly and pleasantly surprisingly, grows at even double digit. However, the difference fundamentally that you see is that the difference is between a service sector or a service-based economy vis-a-vis a trading-based economy. So there are certain economies, without taking names of certain countries, which grow in very high digit, but the margins or the return to the society would generally be not in proportion to a lesser percentage margin that you would normally get from a service-based economy. It has about more than 1 billion people. The literacy rate is increasing, and that's good news for people who are in the education segment, and that's precisely what we are propagating. And that's precisely what we are trying to collaborate with. And most importantly, it's getting more and more democratic, which is good news and which is welcoming for people as well as for all collaborators. As we understand, the continent is going to double to 2 billion people in the next 40 years. It's good news and it's bad news. What it also talks about is the challenges that it's going to throw up on, and more importantly, the opportunities that will come along with the challenges. As everyone says, the market predictions, the economists, the gurus, all of them are talking about how this market is going to be more and more integrated. Now, the moment you have fragmentation of an economy, essentially what it throws up as a challenge is also, or an opportunity is also, how do you integrate? And an integration throws up substantial value proposition that can be unlocked by a lot of value proposition, a lot of stakeholders who are willing to invest in these economies. As we understand, Nigeria is positioned to be the largest economy over the next 20 years. And that's people, that's development, that's evolution, that's so many other things put together. We have had some high-level deep dive into these markets, so probably there's also a passion attached to it. The number of educated people will be much more than today, which obviously is the case, and it's correlated to the earlier point that we spoke about. And the levels of democratization is increasing. Now, when you look at Africa as a future, the future is very different from what it is today. And that's one of the reasons, and I can tell you what happens in the boardrooms, being in a few. In the boardroom, even from a capital markets perspective, the moment you have an Africa play, the moment you go back to your stakeholders and say that you have Africa as a future focus, the value proposition that they attach to your business is normally supposed to be better. And the reason is very simple, because there is a premium to grow in a market which is growing, as compared to a premium in a market which is probably stagnated or is not supposed to grow or not predicted to grow. So as we see it, in the boardroom where the decisions are driven, there's a lot of thought processes that is going in terms of investments into Africa. How can we leverage on the potential? Madam spoke about how one of the leading telecom company made a huge investment into Africa as a continent. And more than anything else, the way I look at it is also that you see a lot of perceptions getting clarified. Earlier, when you logged into Africa or any detailing on the web, and I remember saying this in some of the most important delegations in the past, that the continent could perhaps do well with some level of net PR. I'm very happy to say 3 years or 4 years down the line, today when you log in, what you see is opportunities. And there is also a level of perception change, and a lot of people, I must say it with my own experience, that we went into Africa. I'm very proud to say we produced about 15,000 to about 16,000 odd trained professionals. We contributed to the economy, and we have made good money. So success stories, when they come back, they become brand ambassadors of the continent. And today, there's a level of clarity that has come into the market. The top management is today looking at Africa as an opportunity, and what kind of investments can they do in order to leverage on that opportunity in the years to come. So everyone today is not talking a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year horizon. They are all willing to say, can a sizable level of your revenue start coming in from Africa as an economy? And the answer to a lot of that is, yes, we would like that to happen. And that's precisely where the Indian direction is also taking an African shape. And you have some good news attached to it. You have decreased level of epidemics. You have secured nations. It's much more a secured country. The first time when I was traveling, I was scared. Today, we walk very freely. I will not use the word midnight, but quite late night. So those level of corrections have happened. We have seen those economies progressing. We have seen success levels coming in. It's becoming environmental friendly. I think Indians and Africans are also getting friendly with time. So today, if you're on the virtual world, don't be surprised if about 20-25% of your friends are from Africa. And if they are not, they are missing the bus. There are some opportunities and challenges, So Africa's population, like India, now you'll see some similarities. And that's what, from a knowledge-driven perspective, that's something which is very exciting for us. When we look at it from a capital market perspective, when we look at it from an investment perspective, one of the first things that we look at is, where is education required? It's obviously not required for people who are perhaps 50 plus. So we run after markets where the population is very young. Having said that, India is very, very similar. We have a unique proposition in form of having the average age getting to some 26 now. What it means is that the peak, so when people compare India and China, at times we find it very, very difficult to digest. The fact is that we are comparing an average age now, or probably you're comparing a present and putting a same delta to get to the future, which necessarily need not be the right thing to do. So the point I'm trying to drive home is that Africa's population is very young, Indian population is very young, and young people are generally friends, right? So from the virtual world to the real world, from the business world to the actual world, you will see a lot of collaborations happening as we go forward. What it also means is that, there are two types of opportunities that are going to throw up. The moment you say you have 25 odd people, our HRD minister once threw up a very, the education minister, who was also the telecom minister, he threw up a very important data point about 3 months back in one of the conferences. He said, India has an average age of about 26, and we also have unemployment here. And he said, you may not know we are sitting on a time bomb. Because what it means is that if this set of people are not skilled, they may potentially become detractors of the economy as you go forward. So these are nice data points, but they have the ability and the possibility and the probability to be boomeranging. So likewise, when you look at such an age, there's a compulsion, political, social, economic, for all the like-minded countries to come together, look at it from a macro perspective, and devise strategies to get them into an employable stage. The second advantage of such a young age is you will find a combination of people who are, if I may say, looking at skilling opportunities. That means they are getting trained for their first jobs. And you will find also a set of people who are looking at reskilling. So these are two opportunities, which predominantly in our business term, we may call it as a B2B opportunity and a B2C opportunity. The reskilling being the B2B one, and the skilling one, the B2C one. So there are two opportunities that gets largely, standing out. And there's going to be substantial policy reviews. And if I have to take a leaf of what happened in India and apply it to some level of similarity into what's happening in Africa, you would find some level of concurrence and at different stages of the learning curve. And that's what, when we look at Africa as a market, I rewind India into 10 years, I come here, I see, and when I go to Africa, I see, oh, this is 10 years back India. And we feel very excited because we know we have done so many mistakes to reach where we are. And the opportunity is when we fast forward ourselves and go, and we see 10 years down the line, when we have to fast forward Africa, we see this is where India is. So the idea is perhaps Africa could collapse the time in terms of learning curve by picking up the mistakes that India has done. And that's precisely from the education and training perspective, a collaborative approach that is being proposed as we go forward. There are some challenges, and this slide, if I have to just change the title and put 10 years back, is a similar challenge that India had. And I'm not saying we have conquered all of them. We have not. And probably it'll take us some time to reach there. But what we have done with time is learned the art of addressing each of them with a phenomenal level of conviction, and more importantly, a level of intent and passion that has been extremely demonstrative with each passing year. So what we are proposing is, how do you bridge the gap? Look at India, 10 years back. We were not as spoken as what we are today. And today also as a country, we prefer to be under the radar. And I think there's a great boom time ahead. I was conversing with my wife a few days back, and I told her, it'll be extremely, I have an 8-year-old, and I was telling him that you're not going to get the times that we are getting. So it's a compulsion on us to ensure that we leverage the maximum. Because in our scheme of things, we see that India is yet to touch the sunrise that it can. So the point I'm trying to drive home is that from an African perspective, India used education in a very large manner. And yet, you'll see some data points, and you'll be very, very happy to note the level of conviction that's coming in from the governance perspective, from the economics perspective, and the social perspective is only intensifying the intent on a day-to-day basis. So we have done extremely good level of expansion of educational infrastructures, and you'll see some data points on that. Expanding research and development infrastructure. This was, and probably I should be open in confessing, even in my own viewpoint, I feel this is one area India is still lacking. We are not as good with research, and that's one area where US would still score. But I'm sure the gap is narrowing, because if you look at the new corporate lobbies, all of them are setting up research centers. And don't be surprised if the next decade that we are looking at will be an age of product innovation from our side. So we have been good in services, but probably not too great in innovation, which is the lapse that we have because of the paucity of research labs that we have had. Universities. Read today's Times of India, page 7. When you all retire back to your rooms, it'll be a good read. It talks about the private university bill. And vocational training centers. The vocational training centers in an Indian context has played an extremely good role in augmenting the economy and helping us all to grow. In India, if I have to rewind you about 15 years back, the training industry and the education industry were parallel to each other. 2 tracks. Now what's happening is with time, they are converging. And it is getting increasingly difficult to separate the two. So once upon a time, we would say, I'm in the training business. Then you could say, I'm in the education business. And business, by the way, is taboo here. The moment you call it as training and education, used to be taboo 15 years back. But today, that's not the case. Today, because of the convergence happening, a vocational industry played a substantially high role in terms of augmenting employment of our students here. And that's one of the reasons you see a lot of students getting new jobs. There are some data points here. 75% of the students trained on specific jobs, the vocational space, have got jobs. And if you compare that, it's just about 30 to 40 in a conventional education. It's again the question of the learning curve. You have to go through that journey. The vocational training industry comes you in terms of giving you those 10 things that you're supposed to do, rather than, reading the whole 9 yards. There's been a fundamental disconnect. This slide is very, very applicable to India about 10 or 15 years back. We had a demand from the economy, which is nothing but what the current economy wants. Okay? There is a curriculum